Welcome back to Effortless Coding. My name is Sam and I'm glad that you've joined us in this particular episode. Today I want to introduce something new to you. Remember, we started the HTML5 series and we also introduced PHP. But now you know we cannot do HTML and PHP without having to store our data in a database. So today I want to introduce you to MySQL. That is how they pronounce it, but in actual sense it's MySQL. So MySQL is just a database management system. And when you're talking about a database, we are talking about a set of a place where you can store a collection of data. So let's assume you've collected data you've seen on most online forms where you're going to fill in your data like your name, address and all that. You always click on send or submit. And then it actually happens that there's something that goes on behind the scenes that you can't see, but that data is stored somewhere. So in our case, we are going to work with the database, and the database management system we're going to work with will be MySQL. So think of it in this way. At home or wherever you are, there is always that place where you store things. You use something and then you go and store it that way. So MySQL database is that place where you'll be storing information and data whenever you actually get that data from your web form. And it has to go hand in hand with PHP and HTML. So make sure you at least have an idea of how HTML works and how PHP works for you to start this tutorial. Now, for those people who don't know MySQL really, MySQL is an open source relational database management system. And by open source, I mean it's freely available. The code is freely available. You can actually, this is one of the reasons why we prefer MySQL. If you have a different specific environment, you can actually modify that code to suit your own environment. That is one of the reasons why people prefer using MySQL, because it has an open source GPL license that allows you to modify the code. Now, there are a number of reasons why people use MySQL code. Now, the first one is the open source license. As I mentioned earlier, open source means it's the code is freely available. So it means you have nothing to pay at all. You don't pay anything to use MySQL database, unlike other types of databases. Number two, MySQL, just even from the name MySQL, it uses the standard form of the SQL data language. For those people who've interacted with Microsoft, Microsoft applications, you realize that sometimes you use the SQL server. So the same syntax that you actually use in SQL Server is the same is the same syntax you'll use in MySQL. So it has that standard form of, the SQL data language. Another reason why many people prefer using MySQL is it's compatible with a lot of operating systems. You can talk of Windows, you can talk of Linux, different operating systems. And in addition to that, it's actually compatible, or rather it supports different programming languages. You can talk about C, you can talk about Java, whichever programming language that you know. I'm 100% sure there is support for MySQL in that particular programming language. Another reason why most people prefer MySQL is it works quickly and it works well with large data sets. This is also another reason that maybe I'll mention later, but MySQL can actually store up to 50 million rows of data in one table, or even more. That is one reason. That is another reason why people. So if you're talking about large sets of data, MySQL is actually the database to go with. Another reason why personally I prefer MySQL, especially in this tutorial series, is because we've learned PHP, we've learned HTML, and it is very friendly with PHP. So for us who are coding with PHP, MySQL will actually integrate very well with PHP. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, MySQL is customizable. Based on the open source GPL license that it has, you can actually modify the code so that it suits your specific coding environment. So those for me are actually the reasons why I prefer MySQL. You can go research on more. And I hope before you continue with this series, make sure you go back to our tutorials, the HTML tutorials and the PHP tutorials. Just learn the basics of HTML and PHP for you to now come and proceed with this particular MySQL tutorial series, because you need a basic knowledge. You need basic knowledge of these particular two languages. And until next time, it's always kudos.